Hello and welcome to the third part of OpenRCT2 Graphics, a tutorial series about the RCT-graphics-helper add-on for Blender. In the last episode we created our first park object, the default Blender cube. However, the cube still had some issues, such as glitching and appearing to be underground. In this video we'll learn how to fix these problems. I'll assume you are not a regular user of Blender 2.79, because as of recording this video the latest version of Blender is 4.3, but some of you might already have experience with the current version. So the good news is that many of the tools will work exactly as you are used to, only the interface has a different look. Even if you are completely new to Blender, this is a great place to get started. So especially for the new users, you will need a mouse with a scroll wheel that has a middle mouse button function, so you can click the scroll wheel. And ideally, I would recommend a keyboard with a numpad, as the numpad keys are frequently used for scene navigation. I have enabled screencast keys, so you can see all the inputs I'm making here on the bottom left corner of the 3D view. And then there's one special feature to address. Blender 2.79 did use right click to select objects in the 3D view. By default you would expect left click to select objects, but in Blender 2.79 left clicking only infamously moves this 3D cursor here. If you prefer left clicking, you can even change that in the user preferences under input and then select with left. I will leave my version as it is. Remember to save the user settings, but I am just used to selecting with right click in this version. If you have moved your 3D cursor and you are not happy with that, you can always hit Shift S on the keyboard to open the snap menu and click snap cursor to center. You will also find that menu down here under Object, Snap cursor to center. The cursor will be the point where new objects are created in the scene, so that menu is quite helpful to know. The purpose of this video is to get you to a clean base scene from which you can begin to work. First, let's look at the issue itself here. You can use the Land tool to adjust the tiles around here, and you will find that the cube is actually visible if you move those out of the way. But that has nothing to do with the cube actually being underground, but with a wrong height offset of the sprite. So the sprite is just visibly pushed down here, not the object. We want our object in Blender to be built on top of the Blender ground grid here. So we are going to use that as a base plate and reference in the 3D space. So the first thing to do would be to move the cube upwards one grid unit, and that's quite easy to do. You will need to select the cube, and then you can hit this little magnet icon down here, which will snap the object to grid increments. And I just hit a G here on my keyboard to move the cube around. You can also click the 3-axis gizmo here and just move it up one unit in the Z direction, which is the blue arrow. So let's look at what that did to our park object here. I'm going to do a quick render of this object and reload that, and you see it moved up one unit, but it did not make it quite to the top where we would expect it to be. Also, a good thing to note is that one surface tile has the same width as two Blender cubes placed next to each other. So we can even use the grid as a reference for how wide the object is. Now to adjust the object fully to its correct height, we need to manipulate this sprite y offset value here. This is counted in pixels, and it is a negative value for upwards movement and a positive value for downwards movement, which has simply to do with the origin of the whole game being in the top left corner and always being in the top left corner for objects. So it's counting positive values down and positive values right. So negative value is an upwards movement. I'll just demonstrate that here and just go 6 pixels upwards, make a quick render of that. And you can see now the cube is almost on top of the surface tile. But by how much do we need to adjust this value? We could eyeball this and say, like, let's say 19. That almost seems too much. And then go lower, and you will never get to a very good result this way. I would recommend to use a guide object that we will build in this episode, which is simply just a ground plane that you will then need to align optically with the surface tile. And the way we are going to do that is by adding a plane object in Blender. You can do that by hitting Shift A to open the Add menu. You will also find the Add menu down here under Add. So Shift A and select plane, and the plane will just be created underneath the cube here. And now you can either select the scaling gizmo to make that wider, or you can use the S key to scale this whole thing up, and then you need to align it with the grid. Keep in mind to have this magnet here selected, or if you want to make sure you get it exactly right, you hit S to open the scale action, and then you can just type in the number 2, and this will double up the scale. I just want to make you aware that down here you will have, while scaling, you will have an input field that lets you see what you're typing, and you can even use backspace to edit the number that you are putting in here, and otherwise this will be context sensitive and just show you at which value you are currently. So left click is to confirm this action and right click is to abort it. Okay, you have now created a ground plane here. Let's just see how that looks. And yes, there it is. You can see we are like, what, 2-3 pixels off. Just because this is hard to tell sometimes, let's make this even more precise. I'm going to restore that to a flat surface here. Ideally, we want this to be one single row of pixels so that you can really understand if you are underground or not. So let's transform this into an object that has more of a border around it. And to do this, you can just follow along. We are going to change from the object mode to the edit mode here to manipulate that object. And once this turned orange in that way, you can hit the I key on the keyboard, and this will open up the inset action, and you can see we are creating this border around here. And just as with the scale action, you can type in numbers here to get values, use backspace to edit that input. and we want to type in the numbers 0.06 and then hit left click to confirm that. And if you now use your scroll wheel to zoom in here, you see that this created this little border around here. This is just a value that I find to be working good to get just one row of pixels to be rendered. And now let's delete this centerpiece here by hitting the X key and deleting faces, or this single face in that case. You see now that we cut a hole into this object, and that's exactly how we want it to be. Now switch back to object mode and hit render. Let's reload that object. You can see now that this is working fairly good, but it is by no means a single row of pixels around here, and that has to do with anti-aliasing being activated, which is obviously used to prevent this staircase effect that we're after. So for this technical setup part, we should uncheck this anti-aliasing checkmark here. And just do a quick render again. Reload that, and you see it's more crisp now. And we actually have one single row of pixels here. Now we need to adjust this value here to, let's say, 16, and do a quick render. Okay, now you see that is looking quite good. We have to see if we can go even further. With 15 this still shows up, so let's go one step further down. And now you can see that the pixel line is now underground. So 15 was our perfect value. So we need to find where this is one step before being underground. From experience, -15 is a common value for small scenery objects, so you can almost expect it to be -15, but depending on the object type you're working with, that value may indeed vary. Once you are happy with the Y offset you found, you can reactivate anti-aliasing and disable your helper object from being rendered. And one final thing to do would be to use the snapping menu with Shift S and make sure your cursor is centered, and then use Alt Control Shift and C for opening the origin menu and just hitting origin to 3D cursor. That will move the gizmo to the point where the 3D cursor is currently located. And now you are able to adjust the height as you would expect it to. And the cube is not scaling in both directions. And now you could make this cube double the size by hitting S and then number 2 on your keyboard. And this would give you a full-sized cube in Rollercoaster Tycoon. And as you can see, that works rather nicely. But if you were to make 2 height units next to that cube, you will see that this cube is higher by quite a bit. And the reasons for why that is, obviously one height unit is not half of the grid unit. Marcel did explain that in one of his videos quite nicely. I will make a link to that video. But if you wanted to know how big a height unit is in Blender, You can look that up in Oli Firifir's documentation. Here on the Blender RCT graphics add-on page, you need to go to Wiki, and then under Guidelines, you will find that the value is roughly 1.63, so I will just copy that value. But if you really wanted to understand how that value is calculated, you can also go into the explanation and use tangent 30 degrees times 1.412 divided by 2 as a formula and get an even more exact value to use here. But 1.63299 is more than enough to be exact in this case. So copy that value, and back in Blender you can hit the N key on your keyboard to open up the sidebar here. And in this sidebar you can make adjustments to the position, the rotation, and the scale of this object in numerical form. And you can also manipulate the outer dimensions of this cube. And this is where you need to paste the value that you just copied from the documentation. And this will be a 1 tile wide and 1 base height high block here in Blender. And that's how that looks in RCT. I would say this gives you a fairly good starting point to do some modeling. We will use this cube later on to figure out how the dimensions of our objects have turned out and use that value to describe the object a little better in the object description file, but that is for another video. Thank you so much for watching. If you enjoy my work, feel free to like, share and subscribe, and we will continue this journey in one of the upcoming episodes. See you!